Hello, and welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen. I'm John Charles, and the Poison Pen is delighted to have with us today, virtually, our guest author, S.M. Goodwin. But as we will discover in chatting with her, this is just one of her many literary aliases. Now, before we begin, I do want to thank you for tuning in and mention to those that are interested, we do have copies of S.M. Goodwin's new mystery as well as some of her other books. We would love to have you go online and order a copy or give us a call. We'd be happy to hook you up. So now, without further ado, let me welcome S.M. Goodwin. And let's start by having you tell us a little bit about your backstory before you became an author. From what I gather, it's rather an eclectic career path.
Yes, this is definitely career number maybe 5. I was right before I started writing, I owned a bed and breakfast for 8 years. And before that, I was a criminal prosecutor and a bar owner and a history teacher. But I've been writing now since, I guess, full time since 2014.
Okay.
So this is my first mystery novel, but I have been writing historical romance I guess my first book came out in 2018.
And what was it like publishing your first book? And that was as Minerva Spencer, correct?
Yes. And I think I hit the book publishing lottery because I think it was the first 7 query letters I sent out on my books. I got a response from an editor from Kensington, and they bought my first 3 books before I even had an agent. So
Oh, wow.
I have a skewed perception of the publishing industry because of that, and expect that goodness to happen to me all the time. But yeah, that was really nice. I sold that in 2017, and then books started coming out a year later, and I've had several per year since.
Now, Absence of Mercy, which is your first historical mystery, is your first under S.M. Goodwin. Tell us a little bit about the story and your characters.
Uh, I guess the way that I came up with this book is it's kind of funny. I was watching this program that somebody said, "Oh, you got to watch this show Bones, this TV show Bones."
Oh,
So
yeah.
I watched some of that, and I saw an episode where the characters went over to Britain from Washington D.C. And that really intrigued me. I thought that's just so interesting, the 2 different styles of law enforcement. And so that's how this story was kind of born, where I have a Scotland Yard detective in 1857 going over to New York City to teach investigative techniques. And although that never happened in reality, the truth is that Scotland Yard did do an exchange with the police department in Warsaw at the time, and also with Paris. So this did happen, just not with New York City. That's what I really liked about it, was these kind of the culture clash, and especially in 1857, that's a really fascinating, pre-Civil War, plus the police departments in New York are openly warring in the streets. It's just a great period.
Now, your series detective, Jasper Leitner, is a Crimean War veteran. So he's kind of got some of that military background experiences that haunt him, but he also studied investigative techniques with some real life figures that you bring into the story. Like, was it Vin Doc?
Doc, yeah. And if I'm slaughtering that, I don't speak French, but yes, Eugene Vidocq, who was not only the founder of the Sûreté, but also a career criminal himself. Oh. Who was in jail over and over again for various infractions. And people always joke that the best way to catch criminals is to have been one. So he was very successful. He's the first person he did profiles of criminals. He'd keep like a card file of various people they had arrested. So it's early days. I mean, I think what people don't understand about the 1850s is that there's no fingerprinting. Obviously, there's no blood typing. It's pretty much, there isn't much science. It's more how well you organize the evidence, and that's what Vidocq managed to do, was to kind of build a system where he could identify people based on prior crimes. So.
And your detective is bringing these techniques to New York City, which from what I gather was a rather corrupt political police environment.
Yes, and I'm sure that London had its share of corruption at Scotland Yard. Um, but the New York corruption, I think, is probably intensified because of the political issues of the two police departments. You have a mayor who's kind of championing the existing police department, and then a group of reformers who are trying to, well, who not trying to, they've actually set up a new police department that's going to be run from uh, Albany rather than the city itself. You know, trying to separate it geographically, I guess, from corruption. But anybody who's read about later 19th century knows that the corruption's still there and going strong by the end of the 1900s. So
Yeah, the Gilded Age. Jasper, when he comes to America, meets another detective who's on the New York City police force. Tell us about him and how they interact.
that is Detective Hieronymus Law. My mother always laughs when she hears these character names. She's like, "Where do you get these?" And I try to tell her, I don't name them; they show up with their names. So
Oh,
Hieronymus, or High, as he's called, is a he's struggling to do the right thing. He's much younger than Jasper, and there's really no guidance in the police department. And in the course of an investigation, he finds himself on the wrong side politically and ends up in the notorious New York City jail, the Tombs. So
mhm.
that's how he meets Jasper. Jasper gets him out of jail to help him solve the crime that he kind of stumbles into right off the boat from Britain.
Now, I imagine plotting a mystery, working on a mystery is a little bit different than historical romance because you kind of have to know things that are going to happen and who's responsible. And in the past, you've described your writing process as impulsive. How did you kind of reconcile those two things?
uh, well, I don't think very well. I think I still write the same way. I can't plot anything out, and it's a discovery to me every day. For example, um, I would come and tell my husband, "Oh no, another dead body has shown up, and I don't know who did it." He's- he just looks at me and he just doesn't get how can this be happening with me, not the writer, not knowing who's killing other people in the book. But it's true. I'm a discovery writer. I've since learned that term from a writer friend of mine, and I just kind of go along and stuff happens. That means that in the editing phase, I have to go back and there are a lot of loose ends. But it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I thought, oh man, I'm going to have story angles that, go off into nowhere. But it turned out that it was actually, I could weave in the ends pretty easily. So the thing that I am having difficulty with, I just handed in book 2, I guess a couple of weeks ago. And this is the first time I've ever had a character that, continuation from one book to another. As you know, in romance, it's they get their happily ever after, and they
Yeah.
might pop up if this is a series, but otherwise that's it. And
Mhm.
so I have to be careful not to write myself into a corner with these characters if I want to, I guess, develop them more over several books, which is certainly the hope that there will be several. Um,
Well, I do have to say you did an excellent job with the ending in the first book. I was taken by surprise as to how clever it was done. So
Thank you.
kudos for that. Um, it's definitely on the darker side of the mystery spectrum for readers. Is that something you gravitated to, or is it just the circumstances of the setting and the time period? Um,
Yeah, I mean, I personally find it very difficult to kind of be lighthearted in historicals in general. I mean, you've read
mhm.
several of my romances, and it it's a tough place back in 1857, and unless you had money, and even people who had money, I mean, you look at uh, incidences of things like syphilis, right? I mean, the upper
Mhm.
classes suffered as well, and yeah, I mean, it's nasty, brutish, and short. As can't remember who that was. Was that Hume? Somebody said that it's not an easy life. So particularly in 1857 when you're starting to get some very heavy immigration and you know it's right before 1857 is going to be the year where there's a it's considered the first global depression, the Panic of 1857. We tend to forget about that because we think about the Great Depression in the 20th
Hmm.
century. But prior to 1857, it was more localized in various countries or maybe in Europe. But things are just changing really quickly. So yeah, I think that I kind of the time it was the spirit of the time that made this darker. And obviously, it's right on the verge of the Civil War, and there's some pretty
Hmm.
ugly stuff that's been brewing for a while. So I do try to inject levity in terms of their relationship, and that's where the kind of culture
Hmm.
clash comes into play. Is here's this guy who's definitely been raised in a rarefied atmosphere, dropped into the middle of very democratic, earthy. I think New York City pretty much epitomized the United States at that point. So that's a lot of fun, but it's subtle. the levity is subtle.
Rye maybe is a good word for it.
Okay, I'll take that.
Um, you have to do a lot of research for both this historical mystery series and as well as your historical novels. Can you talk a little bit about that process with a background in history? Is it easier? Do you go to certain sources? How do you recreate the time period for your readers?
Well, it's amazing in that this is 1857, and primarily what I've written before is the Regency period. So that's
Mhm.
the earlier, 30 years earlier. And there are a ton of differences. I mean, the 19th century it was just a revolutionary time in every sense of the word. So I couldn't really rely on a lot of my prior research experience for that. Um, I did find that because this is a historical mystery, I felt like my editor allowed me to indulge myself more in the history. In romance, we all know the romance is the center of the focus of the story. So I actually went back while writing my second book and looked at each page to see how much research I did, you know, per page. And honestly, almost every page requires research. And it's crazy. It's just as small as stuff as if uh, if somebody has money, where did they hold it? What did their wallet look like? The bills were larger. Did a man carry a billfold? So then I head down that rabbit hole. If you're walking down the street, which streets had gas lighting in New York City at that time? So that's another rabbit hole. So it just was endless. And then some subjects obviously required a lot more time, a lot more um, effort. I do have to say that the best thing I found was the New York City Public Directory, which was like the phone book of the time. And it was
Oh,
compiled every single year. They'd take 3 months, and like the census, they'd intensively canvass New York City and get every person's name, address, occupation, marital status. If you tried to avoid them, they would mention you in the preface as having tried to avoid them. So that was really a great source of information. A bunch of occupations that no longer exist, for example. But yeah, this is a lot more intense research wise than my historical romances for sure.
what surprised you the most about this time period when you were doing your research?
Um, I have to say that I had no idea that I knew the census had gone on for a long time, but I
Mhm.
didn't understand. And I guess the census is kind of on my mind because this year was a census year.
Yeah.
And my husband worked the census, and it was interesting finding out how little people actually know about it. They think it's just a head count. That's
Mm-hmm.
it. They don't understand that, oh, well, the state gets money based on, the population from the federal government. So as I went back in time and looked at things like the New York City directory, I was astounded by just, how sophisticated our government is being right from the beginning almost. Because I think the first year for the New York City directory was in the 1700s, late 1700s.
Hmm.
So, we've kind of had our act together in a lot of regards for a long time, which really impressed me because that's not the kind of thing I studied when I did study history. More, I would consider this kind of, I guess, regulatory history or administrative history, I suppose.
Now, in addition to your new historical mystery, Absence of Mercy, you have another book coming as Minerva Spencer, Notorious. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, this is the second generation of characters. So the first trilogy I wrote is The Outcasts, and these are the children of the outcasts. Uh, I didn't intend it to be that way. They just kind of wormed their way into the story. Um, I think probably the reason that I was so interested in them is that my characters in the first three books are all older, so that almost all of them had older children,
Mhm.
and so you got to see those children in the first romances. So it just seemed like a natural progression, to show, oh, how do these kids turn out a few years later. So the first book is the son of the heroine from my very first book,
Mm.
and um, it's the beginning of a new trilogy called Rebels of the Tone, which just means they are the word tone really throws a lot of people. It just means the kind of like similar to the New York City upper 10,000. I think
Mhm.
a lot of people don't know that. It's just a reference to the general upper class of England, not so much as Britain, but England maybe.
High society in a
Yeah,
sense.
high society, which is a really small group of people when you actually, in reality, regardless of all the dukes you see running around in
Novels.
historical. Yeah, I just saw a picture recently of the current dukes in Britain. I think there were 13. There are 13 of them.
Oh, good heavens.
Yeah, and they're all gathered around a table, and it's a fascinating picture because, well, they don't bear very much resemblance to the dukes in romance novels. But there are so few of them. I mean, it is a position of incredible power, right?
Mhm.
So
Now, your heroine in Notorious is a fan of Mary Wollstonecraft. Am I getting that right?
I think that's the way. Yeah, it's quite the last name, Wollstonecraft, and
So tell us a little bit about her, because she has some radical ideas, I guess, for the time on.
yeah, her ideas are, she's considered one of the earliest feminists, and I would argue she's more of a humanist. She's just saying, hey, women deserve, to be treated like human beings, which was a pretty
Mhm.
radical thought back then. And um, if you're a reader of historical romance, you might have come across the fact that women were actually chattel, like as
Mhm.
possessions as much as a nobleman's horse might be his possession, so was his wife, which meant they didn't have very little power once they married. So the heroine in my book is very hesitant, reluctant to marry because she doesn't want to give power over her person to a man. Of course, I found it really interesting that Mary Wollstonecraft, who espoused these viewpoints, herself fell in love with a man and became so, I guess, obsessed with him that when he refused to marry her, she actually attempted suicide. So I thought that was a really, sometimes people can write really brilliant stuff and then their lives, it's hard to measure
Mhm.
up to your own credo, I guess. And I found that to be fascinating. So my heroine has a bit of that. There's no suicide, of course, but she is she's conflicted.
Mhm.
Her conflict is more, hey, she really is crazy about this guy, but this isn't going to fit her. It doesn't fit her lifestyle. So
Well, I think you take a very realistic approach as an author to what women could do at the time period. I mean, it's great to think that they could break all these boundaries, but realistically, they lived in a world where they had to sometimes
and
adapt.
to me, I think that is way more impressive that women managed to get what they wanted by really subtle, you might say devious, but
Mhm.
it's a lot harder it was a lot harder to have control and to make changes in your life back then. And they had to be careful about it and clever about it. So
Mhm.
I'm impressed by that. And I don't want to erase that um, by turning them into, modern women in historical dresses. So
And that's Notorious by Minerva Spencer, and that's
that is.
coming at the end of the month.
November 24th. Yes.
November 24th. Let's see. Okay, let's talk a little bit about you're what's I think known as a hybrid author. So you're published with traditional publishers as well as doing books on your own. Can you tell for people who might not be familiar with that, readers, what that is and what it's like for you as an author?
It's been really interesting because I never thought I would do that. I just didn't have any interest in, that's just a lot of that's a lot of administrative work, first of all, to prepare the novel and get it edited and proofread. But it turns out that I'm a very fast writer. So I had books piling up, and there's only so much that you can sell. And I had 2 contracts going, and I thought, well, I'll just start publishing some of this stuff lying around just to see what happens. And I have been thrilled by the response. I've on two of my self-published books have been selected by Publishers Weekly for review, and they
Oh,
received starred reviews, which is, an
that's
amazing
rare.
endorsement. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so those books have been doing really well. I like to publish in large print because in my traditionally published books, I do really well in large print. So I think maybe I appeal to an older audience. So I've been doing that with my own independent publishing. Um, the thing that is the most daunting about independent publishing is getting money for promotion, which is that's definitely where the deep pockets of big publishers come in handy. So,
Mhm.
there's only from my way of thinking, there's only so much I can do to promote my books, but I am happy with people find me through Minerva Spencer, and then they find my other 2 pen names. So yes,
So
2
if
pen names.
uh, as of today, we don't know about the future.
That's true. Yes, I write under SM Goodwin, which is actually my legally married name, and SM Laviolette, which is my maiden name.
And if readers did want to find out more about your own published books, they could go to your website, minervaspencer.com.
Yes, I have links to all my books on there. So
Let's talk a little bit about what you like most about the writing process, and to use a Regency term, what vexes you the most about the writing.
that's opening a can of worms. I love the writing, and if I can, when I mentioned promotion just a minute ago, one of the things about independent publishing for sure is that you're in charge of all your promotion, and that tends to be a time suck. And I find myself on social media way too much. And as the author and promoter of my works, I'm also exposed to the review process, which every single person will tell you,
Yes.
don't read your own reviews. But it's this masochistic process.
Mhm.
So I guess I really dislike the promotion the most about writing, or being pulled in those different directions. The writing itself is still a delight, even with my short attention span for careers. I can't believe I'm going strong after 6 years, 7 years. I'm still getting up in the morning and loving to write. And I have an absolutely amazing agent who everything I send her, she reads, which, judging by what my co-authors or fellow authors have said, is pretty rare in the business. And she just loves my writing. And so she encourages me to write in any genre that grabs me, which is how I got the historical mystery out recently. It was something that I've been thinking about doing, but thought, well, should I stick with romance? But no, she said, write what I want to write. So, I
That's
mean,
great.
I think that's wonderful. Yeah. And don't you think that's rare? I mean, you've been around this business a lot longer than I have.
It's it's really difficult for some authors because on the one hand, do you want to divert yourself if you have a ready audience for your books and risk it on something that might take time away from that and not attract the readers that you have? It's, to be perfectly honest, I have no idea why anyone would want to be an author. It's just like, oh my God, the process is, people think you just sit there and write books, but no, there's so many decisions involved with it. I think you're smart to adapt different pseudonyms for your work, because there are going to be people who love historical mysteries that are going to say, no, I'm not reading your
Yeah.
historical romance. And there's readers who vice versa. So this way, at least you're kind of cluing them in at the beginning and saying, this is a different kind of reading experience. So they're not, why didn't know that there was going to be the mystery there or something like that.
Right. Well, I've learned a lot about that from listening to Jane Ann Krentz, who also has her own
Yeah.
pile of pen names that she's had to deal with. And
Mhm.
and that's really helpful. And Yeah, it's a pain, but I think you're definitely right about. I mean, I have my first readers of my historical mystery were my romance readers, and I think the story was too grim for a lot of people, too gritty for a lot of people who read romance. So,
Yeah, I will admit I am definitely a romance reader, and I loved your historical mystery. I understand why you did something at the end to one of the characters, but the historical romance reader is like, no, 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 no. That's not what I want. Go back and rewrite it so
yeah,
that I
that's what my beta reader said too. Like, oh, I just wanted a different ending, but that's okay. You can read the next book and find out what happens there, right? So,
there you go.
hmm um, I forget what your question was. Did I answer it? What did I
I
like?
think
What do I?
what vexes you, what you love about it. You mentioned readers. I always love to hear what authors are reading because many of them are readers as well as writers. So, what have you read that you want to share with other readers?
Well, one of the dangers of writing in a new genre is that I don't read in the genre that I'm writing in currently. I'm just I'm terrified of idea bleed from,
Mhm.
you know, somebody else writing historical mystery, for example. So now that I've put aside my historical mystery for a while, I can pick up some historicals. I just recently read Ken Bruin's newest book, The
Oh,
Galway Epiphany,
mhm.
and I love his style. It is I would love to be able to write like him. I think he's very his kind of staccato delivery really keeps me turning pages. And and I do like to read people who don't write like me because I find it very educational, you know.
Mhm.
As a as an author, I'm studying their style while as a reader I'm enjoying the mystery. This was another Jack Taylor story, so
Mhm.
he's also kind of an old friend at this point. I think that's
Mhm.
either book 15 or 16. On my to read pile, I have Diane Freeman's. Uh, I think that came out in
Yes.
July, her third
Mhm.
book, and I'm not going to get the title right because it's mischief and mayhem. I
Or,
think is it?
or murder. See, the problem is there's another author who has a November book coming out called A Lady's Guide to Mischief and Mayhem, which
Is
is
it?
very similar to Diane's. But so you have these two, and they're both historical mystery. Well, one's historical mystery, Diane's definitely with a little bit of romance.
uh,
Amanda Collins, who's the new author, is historical romance with a little bit of mystery. So, and
okay.
these, I think readers don't understand these things just happen organically. It's not like writers are in some secret circle saying, okay, this year's color of the month is, jade, and everyone has to write about that. It just, I mean, I'm amazed. There's several authors who have books coming this fall that are set in Alaska. Christina Dodd has a new book, and
Oh wow.
Paige Shelton has another one coming, and they both Alaska just seems to be on in these is it Zygest or whatever that term
Right.
is?
Yeah.
Or,
I
yeah.
think that's really weird how that happens because you're working in isolation and yet to come up with the same idea. But then, calculus was developed in two continents or two, I guess, England, no, same continent, two countries at the same time. So it
Mm-hmm.
just happens. But yeah, I like Diane's style. I like that Edwardian period is something that I have not researched yet. So that's fun to read. Um, and yeah, her books are definitely there is an interesting kind of mystery that's going throughout the three of them, but it's definitely I mean, romance. It's the mystery that you're reading for, though. I think I
Mm-hmm.
do. I do like her mysteries.
And so, what's next for you? We've talked about your November book. You mentioned there's going to be another mystery as S.M. Goodwin.
Yeah, and I just got the cover and the title for that, and it's called Crooked in His Ways,
Oh,
and that will be out next September. So next year I'll have three books coming out. Two, the next two in my Rebels of the Tone series, Outrageous and Infamous, and then the second book in the mystery, and that they'll actually both be coming out in September. That makes for
oh,
an exciting month when you have two books launching.
You get to compete against yourself.
I do. I do. And it's like all my friends are just, are you crazy? Do you ever do anything but write?
Well, I
No.
guess it's especially hard because you just don't know how the pandemic is going to affect publishing either. It pushes
Oh,
back dates. It makes some authors have to scramble to fill a slot. So I guess it's to be determined would probably be the best way to say that
yeah.
right now.
That did happen to a lot of my friends who, and that was really unfortunate when right when it hit back in April and May, and people were kind of taken by surprise in the US at least. I've been whining nonstop about the fact that I have two launches in an election year in November. Everyone's heard that. And it turned out not to be as bad as I thought. I think people are so exhausted that it's kind of like,
Yes,
yeah, I need a book.
they need to escape. Yeah.
So that may work in my favor after all.
Well, this has just been delightful. I want to thank S.M. Goodwin, whose new book, I'll see if I can put it up on the screen, is Absence. Oh, it's backwards, or maybe Absence of Mercy.
It's not backwards for me.
Oh, good. I've apologized for yours. This is my first solo Zoom thing, so we're all learning as we go along.
Yeah, I
And
thought
if,
you did fabulous.
as Minerva Spencer, we have Notorious. And of course,
Yay.
feel free to go to the Poison Pen. We'd be happy to send copies to you. We do mail order, or you can pick it up here curbside. And once again, thank you, Minerva, SM Goodwin, whoever you call yourself. It's just been delightful.
All three of us were just so glad to be here this morning. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, and thank you for tuning in.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.